This is the weekend edition of Fear and Greed Business News, Australia's best business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Jennifer Duke.
Good morning, Michael.
Now, Jen, our weekend show is very, very different to the weekday show. It is about the two of us each nominating what we think is the biggest story of the week, the most remarkable story. We'll find a sleeper story, which is kind of one that's not getting the attention that we feel it deserves. And then our favourite story. Of course, Jen, you have been with us now for really most of the last kind of 2 months. And Sean Aylmer is back on deck from Monday after a month-long European trip, and you've done a fantastic job.
Aww. And
as I mentioned in yesterday's show, I really hope that we can send you on your way with a solid defeat, and that the thrashing that you are delivered today, it comes with love. Because every week we are joined by our adjudicator, and it's usually our Fear and Greed colleague, Adam Lang, but he's also away today, which means actually two things. Number one, I'm officially in charge. And number two, means we have a guest judge, and it's someone who's done it all before and from memory ruled in my favour, which is why he has been invited back for another go. Tim Burrowes, media commentator, founder of Mumbrella, now the publisher of media newsletter Unmade. Tim, good morning.
Good morning, Michael. Good morning, Jen. Yes, very proud to be back in Adam's shoes one more time. And I did think in last week's edition where he started threatening to deduct points for indiscipline on the part of the competitors. I thought that's an interesting thought. I'll have to bear that in mind next week.
Yeah, I think demerit points are a risky kind of thing because, I mean, this show can go off in various directions. And Adam isn't one to talk because his judging is so variable, and the criteria that he applies just kind of changes every week. So
I love that you're sledging him in his absence.
That's actually, it feels quite dishonourable, doesn't it? Look, we will jump into it. So, Tim, you've got your pen and paper. You're ready to do your scoring. Jen, you go first on the biggest story of the week.
Okay, I will do mine first. So it would probably be pretty poor form if I didn't pick the economy and the latest data as the biggest story of the week, because we're only a few days out now from the Reserve Bank Governor Michelle Bullock's first interest rate decision in her new job. Now, one of the first pieces of economic news was one that we feel every time we're at the servo at the moment. I'm pretty sure everyone can relate to this. It's the rising cost of petrol. So there's been about a 9% jump at the pump on the back of a global oil supply crunch, the international reasons for which we've been talking about all the time on the podcast. And this had opposition leader Peter Dutton saying that the federal government needed to refocus back on the cost of living. But it also had the airlines, Qantas and also Air New Zealand, flagging these huge pressures that they face in trying not to pass the costs along to customers. And these are really huge expenses. So for Qantas, it's about $200 million in extra fuel costs, and that's after their hedging. More concerning is that this is a major contributor to the latest inflation print. So we all know that crushing inflation is the priority of the Reserve Bank right now, and their decisions to increase rates to combat it is the reason that mortgages are so much more expensive. But the latest data gave us some pretty bad news. Inflation accelerated for the first time in 4 months, and petrol was largely to blame for that. So the media and some of the public were in a bit of a frenzy about a potential extra rate rise. Economists are, though, largely trying to soothe those nerves by explaining that the Reserve Bank looks through those volatile figures and to the underlying inflation data, which isn't showing quite the same acceleration. But this isn't case closed quite yet. So wages are going up. That's according to latest Seek data. And that can add additional pressure on prices as people have more in their pocket to spend. Meanwhile, the Australian Bureau of Statistics is showing that job vacancies are starting to slow. And that could indicate that the tight employment market is easing, which would add downward pressure to inflation. It's not really clear cut. So as I mentioned, the RBA board is due to meet on Tuesday. And with only 3 cash rate meetings left until the end of the year, the state of the economy right now and what it means for households and businesses grappling with inflation and higher interest rates as we come into Christmas is really the biggest story in town.
That is a big story. I would argue, potentially, and I don't want to criticise, and I'm certainly not going to tell you, Tim, how to do your job.
Heaven forfend.
But did that kind of feel a little bit like an omnibus story, kind of where you had multiple stories all rolled into one? You got wages.
I think I might know where you're going with that, Michael. And I think you've been very unfair not to warn Jennifer about my view of omnibus stories.
Ooh.
Okay, full disclosure, and I accidentally forgot to mention this at the start of the show, is that when I approached Tim to be the guest judge for this week. He said he was looking forward to cracking down on omnibus stories. And I'm sorry, Jen, I don't know how I completely forgot to pass that on to you.
That's some dirty last-minute tactics, Michael.
It certainly was. And I have no regrets. But look, I'm just going to leave that there. And I'll just leave, Tim, you can do what you want with that piece of information. I'm not going to do an omnibus story. What I'm going to do, though, is provide one single story with a couple of key components to it. Now,
which sounds like an omnibus.
That's perception, really, Tim, and I can't do anything about that. The fact is that it is one single story, and that story is the massive week in politics. Component number one, we started the week with the release of the employment white paper. In a nutshell, I'll summarise this down because there was a lot in it. 31 future reform directions, including there was a national skills passport, extending the work bonus for pensioners and veterans, reforming programs to help job seekers, a boost to a bunch of TAFE courses. Interestingly, the white paper, I thought, also made a series of projections about the economy and about the workforce in a decade, what it's going to look like 10 years down the track, with the digital and technology workforce to grow more than 20% by 2033, the clean energy workforce to grow by 127% in the next 10 years. The aging population is going to see the care and support economy increasing by 22%. Now, these are big numbers when you think about it, and the white paper is designed to make sure that we're meeting those needs by shaping employment policies now. So this was a big story. Basically, look at it as a headline for this week. And then just down below, you've got a little kind of subheadings as well. Component number two, if you will, of the big week in politics. Michael Pizzullo, who is one of the most powerful public servants in the country, has stood aside and has been referred to the Public Service Commission after 9 newspapers revealed a huge number of text messages that suggested that he may have been attempting to influence political outcomes behind the scenes. Now, public servants are, of course, meant to be apolitical. They are meant to be independent, but the messages between the Home Affairs Secretary and Liberal Party power broker Scott Briggs suggested that he may have been a little bit more involved than he arguably should have. And the final component in this single story about politics is the resignation of Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews. Jacinta Allen took over after Dan Andrews stepped down this week following 9 years in the job, including some very, very tough days during the very, very long COVID lockdowns. And actually, when I was thinking about that, it makes you realise just how much change we have seen in politics over the last couple of years. When you think about how high profile the members of National Cabinet, the state premiers and the Prime Minister were during that time. Think about it. You've got Gladys Berejiklian gone, Mark McGowan gone, Scott Morrison gone, Stephen Marshall gone, Dan Andrews gone. Only Queensland's Anastasia Palaszczuk and the ACT's Andrew Barr remain now from those days of lockdowns, from those days of National Cabinet. And it just adds a little bit of colour, a little bit of kind of context, I suppose, to what was a very big week in politics, a single story, one single week, the biggest story of the week. Tim.
Well. Look, I guess we ended up very nearly neck and neck in that both people did go for omnibus answers, both very strong answers. Now, when I'm weighing a few things up, Michael, I think one thing perhaps weighs against you is, you know, like Adam, I have to express a bit of personal bias, which in my case is pro-Tasmanian bias. So it was very poor form not mentioning Tasmania's premier at the time of COVID, Peter Gutwin.
I realised as I was saying, I'm like, oh no, I've missed Tasmania in my list. Oh, this is going to go against me. Oh.
So that was perhaps, you know, when we're on the 1%ers, we could ask ourselves whether that's it. So
I can pinpoint the moment at which I failed today, and that is it. And everything after that is going to be just downhill, isn't it?
I'm afraid that is indeed the case. It was very tight, but I think in the end I do have to give it to Jen on the economy, because it wasn't as if we had a single piece of huge data, but you can't ignore what fuel prices are doing at the moment and what they're likely to do to inflation. That's going to affect every business out there, I think. So I'm going to narrowly give round one to Jen.
And she doesn't lose any points for the omnibus story?
Well, both of you lost equal points for both having omnibus stories. So it all balanced out.
1-0 heading into the most remarkable story. Can I go first on this one, Jen?
Yes, you can.
Okay. All right. Well, look, There are actually a few choices, some good options for the most remarkable story this week. But for me, the single most remarkable was the insight that we received into the culture of PwC Australia. And it is a pretty extraordinary culture that allowed the tax leak scandal to take hold and to trash the reputation of the consulting firm. Now, all goes back 10 years. Former partner breached confidentiality agreements with the government, sharing details of upcoming tax changes that they had consulted on, sharing those details with colleagues who then used that info to help clients. Anyway, it has been a long saga that has been playing out very, very publicly in recent months through the media, and the reputational damage done to PwC has been quite extraordinary. As part of the fallout, PwC engaged Dr. Ziggy Switkowski to review the company's culture and their governance. And this week he reported back, and he did not hold back. So 90 partners and senior executives were interviewed. Other staff contributed to focus groups, and many of them reported the same thing. A, quote, high-performance, results-focused culture that was used as an excuse to justify poor behaviour. So the partners who brought in lots of money were considered untouchables and rainmakers, and the profit was prioritised over pretty much everything. There was a, quote, whatever it takes attitude. There was a lack of independence. There were too few external voices. There was too much power at the top. There were ineffective processes. Revenue was king, basically. And look how that turned out. Look what happened. And Ziggy Switkowski made 23 recommendations. There was an overhaul of leadership structures, including a non-executive chair and 3 additional board members. There's more transparency, more accountability. Will it be enough, though? I mean, it's going to be a long time before anyone associates PwC with anything other than this scandal, which is pretty unfortunate considering the remarkable history that business does have. But now it is going to be branded with this tax leaks scandal for a very long time. And this report shows us this week that it's not just a reputational crisis. This is a deep-seated cultural problem at this business. And I think that is just remarkable. And it's probably a warning to other businesses that operate on those same principles of profit is king and prioritizing high performance, results focused culture over behavior. And to me, this is a remarkable, remarkable story.
You know what, Michael? I think any other week, I probably would have picked that as my most remarkable story as well. But not this week, because this week I actually think that my most remarkable story is the US Federal Trade Commission's case against retail and media giant Amazon. So the FTC, along with 17 states, is suing Amazon for being a monopoly and using its powers to do all sorts of allegedly market manipulative activity. And that includes claims that Amazon is using its giant power as the biggest player on the monopoly board to crush competition, overcharge the public, and increase fees. And the more detail that I actually was reading about this, the more incredible it became to me. So they're actually alleging that Amazon has driven up fees to the point that many sellers see 50 cents in the dollar of their revenue extracted by the retail giant. They're also saying that Amazon penalizes sellers that aggressively discount their products by leaving them pretty much invisible in search results and forcing them to pay for advertising. And that's while consumers are shifted towards more expensive goods. This is a landmark case in the US, and it comes straight after an antitrust case was launched the week before against Google. And the other aspect that's really remarkable to me is the FTC's boss, Lina Khan. So back in 2017, when she was just 29 years old, she published an academic article saying that the retailer had escaped anti-competition scrutiny. She was actually just in her third year at Yale Law School at the time, and it put her on the map. So this lawsuit has been a long time coming, and it will shape her career for better or worse. So the stakes are high on absolutely every level here. And for its part, though, Amazon says the case is wrong on the facts and the law. So the outcome of this and the ongoing next few months are going to be the most remarkable story in town.
Tim, what do you think?
Well, this is tricky. I must admit, when I heard Michael begin, I just thought, this is going to be really hard to beat, because I totally agree. There are so many lessons in the PwC story. You know, if you look at so many kind of these big brands that have a big brand crisis at some point, so often it starts somewhere with culture. And again, just that sort of sense of just because you can do it, does it mean you should, which felt like the PwC story. So that was very strongly argued, and I felt right on point. But also, what a great argument about Amazon, because it does strike me that one of the themes of the next few years is going to be the monopolies or the monopolistic behavior of some of the big players, because of course, yes, we have the Amazon case just kicking off, and credit to Jennifer for avoiding the opportunity to turn it into an omnibus. But we've had progress on a similar crackdown with Google, and their stranglehold over the advertising supply chain as well reached a new stage. So I look at my scores, and I've scored you both identically for this round.
Okay. So it's now 1.5 to 0.5 overall.
Correct.
That's okay. That's okay.
And just one overall point in it so far.
Oh, wow. And that's the Tasmanian Premier point from the first round.
Gosh.
Hopefully it doesn't come back and haunt you, Michael.
I have a bad feeling it's going to. All right. We'll be back in a moment and we'll find a sleeper story of the week. All right, Jen, we are looking for a sleeper story. So a sleeper story is one that's maybe flying under the radar a little bit. It requires a bit of effort to have a bit of a look around and pick something out that we feel is potentially a bigger story. And we are joined, of course, this week by our guest judge, Tim Burrowes, who has told us very clearly that he does not want to hear any omnibus stories. And so, Jen, I hope for your sake you've got a single sleeper story for us. Go for it.
This is a single sleeper story, but it is an unusual one. Battery fires. So I want you to think for a minute about all the things in your home at the moment that might have lithium-ion batteries in them. So electric cars, e-bikes, your solar system, even rechargeable toys and torches. And then I want you to think about the fire risk. So the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission this week was raising concerns about a huge rise in product recalls and fires caused by these batteries. So a couple of numbers just to put it in quick perspective. 89,000 products were recalled with the batteries in them in the last 6 years, but the last year in particular has been a huge problem. So in the first 8 months of this year, we've had 165 fires caused by products with these batteries, and that's more than all of last year put together. And that means that the ACCC wants national regulation. And also this week, the news cycle was temporarily fascinated by a huge fire because of batteries at Queensland's first large-scale Tesla battery storage site. Tesla had to tell the authorities to let it burn out over a few days after local fireys had thankfully contained it. But it's no small incident. So it was at a $60 million facility, and it's a huge energy storage system that's set to be up and running next month. And it kicked off a political fight, which is a clear indicator of things to come and why this story is such a sleeper. So National Senator Matt Canavan used that incident to say that the new energy grid is worse than the old one. And that actually prompted Energy Minister Chris Bowen to hit back in a post on Elon Musk's X, which I thought was a little ironic, saying that the coalition will find any reason to have a go at renewable energy. I reckon this issue is only going to get bigger as the shift to electrification, renewables and rechargeable products goes up on the rise. So that's why it's my sleeper story. Michael, what did you pick?
That is a very good sleeper story. Look, my story is one that I actually think should have led every single news bulletin in the country all week, but it didn't, which makes it therefore officially a sleeper story. Australia is set to become a big player in the space race, and nobody is talking about it. And it's all because of this one company called Advanced Navigation. It's moving into a new facility in Sydney, a facility that will give it the capacity to increase output tenfold. So that's a significant jump. Advanced Navigation has the potential to produce $3 billion worth of navigation and surveying equipment annually for customers like just a couple of small entities. You may have heard of them, Airbus and Boeing, and even one called NASA, because this technology is actually going to be used on future NASA moon missions. And they'll be using robots, dozens of robots, to do this. The business is worth around $1 billion right now. But honestly, and I'm aware that this is a terrible kind of pun, but the sky is the limit for this company. So maybe, and here is my prediction, maybe this is where the future of Australian manufacturing is heading, away from the long dead, say, mass production of cars towards the high-tech, very specific, very valuable production of technology like this. And if it means that Australia gets to the moon as well, even via just like a piece of our technology, then it's got my full support, which is probably something that does not mean a huge amount to Advanced Navigation. Plus, you know what? One of the other good things about this company, Advanced Navigation, the name tells you exactly what it does, which is is a bit of an issue that I have. Companies that give themselves names that don't actually tell you what the business is. Having said that, Having said that, if you went up to any kind of Joe Citizen or Jane Doe, or no, I've got to stop saying Jane Doe because that would mean you're going up to a corpse, isn't it? If you went up to, say, Joe Blogs on the street this week and said, hey, how about that news about advanced navigation? They wouldn't know what you're talking about. And they should, because this is a sleeper story. By definition, case closed, I win. It's now 2.5 to 1.5.
Well, I do admire your rhetoric, Michael. I seem to remember during the week listening to the podcast and a note of glee coming into your voice when this story came up, and you basically decided you were going to bank it for the weekend edition.
Yep.
So I'm not surprised to hear you making the argument. And look, and I think, you know, like yourself, I do love a nice space story. I do like to look up at the moon and watch the satellites go past, and all of those things that you also enjoy. But then I also have to look at Jen's very well argued case as well, which is, looking at the rise of battery technology, or the challenges of battery technology. And, I think, in fairness, I don't think I am going to call it an omnibus answer, because both examples were pretty relevant, the battery fires and the ACCC warning. And like we say in journalism, two's a trend. So I am, in fact, going to give it to Jen.
Yes. I'm pleased. How many points are in it, though? I'm curious now while we get into the last round.
Well, still not very many points.
Ooh.
So Jen took that one by just 1 point.
Oh, gosh.
So
Okay.
although Jen, on marks out of 100, does lead by 2 points at this stage, it is all catchable up.
Yeah, I was going to say that's not a huge lead for the final round.
So what it actually means that on the overall story count, Jen, you're leading 2.5 to 0.5. So technically it's impossible for me to win overall on the story count. However, I could achieve that rare victory of where I lose on the story count and actually win on the individual points.
Everything's possible based on the quality of your arguments.
There's always a way. It's like radio ratings and the survey data. There is always a win somewhere in the data, and you just have to dig deep enough to find it.
Big in the demos.
That's right. And so, look, I'm going to go first, if that's all right, Jen, on the favourite story.
Loser's luck. Go for it.
Did you just say loser's luck?
That's right.
Savage. Okay, for me, for my favourite story of the week, I am fascinated by the point at which business and politics meet, and sometimes meet quite spectacularly. We've seen that playing out in the US this week. Both instances, not an omnibus. They are just now. Tim, you've got me so paranoid now. I'm about to. They are just 2 examples of the same story. It is not an omnibus, but I now feel like I need to insist that it's okay. In relation to the automotive sector in the States this week, so we had Ford pausing its construction of a $3.5 billion plant in Michigan. Now, this is a plant that's supposed to be making electric vehicle batteries. However, they have paused this. There is no planned timeline for the work to resume, or even any kind of a guarantee that it actually will resume. So it might just sit there as kind of a withering shell, a husk of a factory. But the reason for this, though, is particularly interesting, because one of the reasons why this work has stopped is very, very, very political. Ford was intending to use technology from a Chinese company called, I'm going to butcher this, Contemporary Amperex Technology. Now, relations obviously between the US and China have been a little bit strained of late, not helped obviously by, it depends on how far back you want to go, but kind of Chinese spy balloons and more recently, reports of US iPhones potentially being banned in Chinese government departments. So Ford's decision is a big one. It is a very significant one. The political pressure in this space, though, is pretty significant, because you got US Senator Marco Rubio then declaring that the deal would bring America's greatest geopolitical adversary into the heartland of the country. So here is a perfect example of geopolitical considerations having a massive impact on a US business. But there is more. Again, all very well linked. In fact, they're not even separate stories. They're just one big one. The United Auto Workers in the US have been striking of late, and this week they gained a reasonably high-profile supporter, arguably the highest profile supporter they could possibly ask to join US President Joe Biden joined the picket line. He even wore a union-branded baseball cap. He told a rally that the unions helped build the middle class and the workers deserve what they've earned, and they had earned a hell of a lot more than they're getting paid now. Then how about this? He urged them to stick with it. So he's encouraging strike action to continue. And then he said that he backed their calls for a 40% pay rise. 40%. Now, just imagine that you are the boss of General Motors or Stellantis or Ford right now. This is unprecedented for a sitting US president to do this, to join the picket line and to be so overt in his support in essentially these union negotiations over this workforce and how much they're being paid. It shows just how badly he wants and needs the union endorsement in the 2024 presidential election, despite the fact that statistically, very few Americans actually belong to unions. So here, once again, we are at this point where business and politics collide in quite a spectacular way. And we get to watch all of this from afar, just enjoying the theatre that is going on in the United States right now. That is my favourite story. Jen.
You always leave your fighting moment right to the end, and it makes me very nervous when we roll into this part of the weekend edition. Look, so my favorite story, definitely not an omnibus, but I'll go with trend maybe, because it was the rapid advancements of AI that we've seen through the week and the way that companies are brawling to be on that cutting edge for customers right now, plus the very real improvement in productivity that might be around the corner. I'm also maybe going for some subjective category marks here because I'm aware, Tim, that you've got a Timbot, which is an AI, basically for our listeners that don't know, that uses information from your book and newsletters to answer some media-related questions. So I feel like you'll like this one too as a favourite.
Oh.
Well played.
I'm trying. I'm
well
trying.
Played.
Can Jen lose points for being sickening?
Absolutely not.
Well, look, hear me out first. So firstly, we did have this big update on what ChatGPT is going to be able to do next. So it's going to be able to talk and interact with images. And that's going to put it on a path that, in my mind, is actually a front-on collision with Amazon's Alexa and Apple's Siri. And at the same time, there was new research that came out showing that ChatGPT can lift work output even for really highly skilled consultants. So there was a study showing that Boston Consulting Group employees, these are people with MBAs and stuff like that, lifted the tasks that they got through in a day by 12% and produced work of 40% better quality by using that service, which is pretty massive. But then at the same time, we had Meta announcing that AI-powered chatbots are coming to Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram, and they'll be able to use Microsoft's Bing to answer people's questions. And they're also going to be using celebrity persona chatbots, using the likenesses of A-listers like Snoop Dogg, which I'm kind of excited about. And the advancements only get more fascinating because Australian leaders are heading over to the UK in a few weeks for the world's first ever Global Artificial Intelligence Safety Summit. And it's going to be held at the famous Bletchley Park, which is the historic workplace of codecracker mathematician Alan Turing. And that definitely makes it my favourite story, if only for that reason alone.
Wow. This does make it tricky. And Jen is correct. I am super interested in AI. Yes, if you go to timbot.ai, you can ask me about the media and hear the replies in my voice, which is kind of weird.
Do you spend a lot of time talking to it, Tim? Do you just
training it?
No. After it's been trained, just going, you know what? I'm sick of talking to other people. I just want to chat to myself right now and just sit down in front of the computer and just talk to Timbot.
Do you know, I have been known to ask it questions of things I can't quite remember myself. So it's become this sort of external memory drive for things that I've written myself. So it does have usefulness. And then the other thing that happened this week as well is Google Bard upgraded as well, which you can now, and I'm only just beginning to play with this over the last few days, you can ask it to analyze your own inbox and tell you things about yourself or tell you about messages you might have missed, although it's quite basic. I asked it to analyze my inbox and its main assessment was that you receive lots of emails from your colleagues and that you typically respond to the emails within a few hours.
Genius.
So it wasn't massive insights, I have to say. But yes, that does give the evidence that Jen has certainly leaned into a topic of interest for me. But let's also look at Michael's very well argued case as well, because I think you're right in that you found two examples of a collision of business and politics, both in the automotive sector, which is I guess where you really don't want collisions.
Oh,
but
glorious.
Well, I was surprised you didn't lean into that one yourself, Michael, actually.
Oh, an opportunity missed.
So now let's see. So I've already written down Michael's score. Let's write down Jennifer's score. Okay, yeah. I actually am going to give this round to Jennifer as well.
Oh my gosh.
So that means a victory for Jennifer both in the rounds and also in the overall scoring as well, despite a really excellent effort by Michael.
An effort to undermine Jen from the start of the show. I think that's what you mean, right?
That is karma, Michael.
I deliberately withheld information about what Tim was looking for in his stories. It really feels like this is a lesson for young listeners out there to just be smarter in the way that you use that intel, like to be more clever in the way that you implement it and withhold more if you can.
I suppose the worst would have been if you then encouraged her to do omnibuses and then had held back yourself.
I did try that as well. I said, you know what, Jen, I reckon cram as many stories as you can into your biggest story. just make sure we cover the lot. Anyway, look, 3.5 to half a point overall for the story count. And what was the points out of 100?
It was 87 points to 84 points.
Oh, that was close. Well, you know what? In the end, I think that's a pretty good result. And I think we've covered all the main stories, which is really the purpose here, to make sure that we provide...
It's not, though. Is it, Michael? It's not. It's to win. Winning is the purpose.
Thank you very much, Jen. Now, Tim, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for doing such a great job in Adam's absence of really kind of replicating Adam's brutality in his judgments and for implementing a few of your own little subjective biases into your decisions.
I'm here to deliver whole new subjective biases.
Now for next time, I've been taking notes on what you like. So thank you so much, Tim.
My pleasure. See you next time.
That was Tim Burrowes, media commentator, founder of Mumbrella, and now the publisher of media newsletter Unmade. Definitely check that one out. It is always a good read. And Jen, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Michael.
Not just for today, but thank you as well for all of your work over the last number of weeks while Sean has been away. I know that you have a very busy day job as the economics correspondent for Capital Brief, and it has been an absolute pleasure working with you on Fear and Greed.
Oh, it's been lovely to have been here with you fighting it out every weekend, so I appreciate it.
And I'm so glad you were able to take a win out today. It hurts me to say that, but congratulations. Now, make sure you're following the podcast and please join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed Business News. Have a great weekend.